To start, you'll want to grab just a sheet of tissue paper, like gift wrap tissue paper, plain white, and trim it down so it's just a little bit smaller than a sheet of printer paper. So if printer paper is 8.5 by 11, maybe trim this down to about 8 inches by 10.5 inches. And then I like to use painter's tape on this. I just typically use painter's tape when I'm feeding stuff through my printer, but just center that tissue paper right on the paper and then tape it all the way around. I guess there's two schools of thought on this, and maybe you just need to get to know your printer the best. You can either tape it at the top and the bottom, or you can tape it all the way around. But really the most important part here is to make sure that the tissue paper is as smooth as possible so this doesn't jam while you're feeding it through your printer. Also, people ask me what type of printer to use. I don't think it matters, just as long as it's your home printer that prints nice color images. If it prints nice color images on regular paper, it'll do the same on tissue paper. I have like an Eco Tank something printer that I really like. I'll link to it below, and it works really well. And I really like it because I can fill individual color cartridges instead of having to replace all three at the same time. But that's just personal preference. And so then you want to prep your scrap wood. So I just grabbed a piece of scrap wood from my basement from a previous project and I painted the whole thing black. You could do any dark color that you like, navy, dark brown, even a dark wood stain would be fine. And then let that dry and go over it with a lighter color. So this is just a taupe color. Once again, any type of lighter color will do. You just want to distress it up a little bit, just so that the black poking through when you do the crackle finish at the end isn't as stark. But let that completely dry, and then here's my printed image. As you can see, there's a couple little ink stains at the bottom, like it's not always perfect as it goes through the printer. This is a free printable, I will link to it. If you want more free printables, this is part of a set that you can access. It's for my email subscribers, so I will also link to that if you want to have access to all of my seasonal printables. Otherwise, this individual one will just be available in the blog post. It'll be a big green button that says download the printable here. And then you'll just want to trim away all the excess tissue paper. So I prefer to rip it. I feel like you get, with the jagged edges from ripping the tissue paper, it's not as obvious when you do the image transfer that it's actually the piece of tissue paper on the wood. So I like to rip it. You just be careful not to rip away any part of the printed image. And then center that on your wood to get an idea of where you do not want to apply Elmer's glue in this next step. I chose to do a crackle finish just around the edge of my scrap wood piece here, but not in the center. You obviously, if you wanted to apply Elmer's glue to this whole surface, you're more than welcome to. This is just, I wanted to do something a little different and a bit more creative. So I just applied glue all the way around the edges of that scrap wood piece and then smoothed everything out with a 1-inch flat paintbrush. And then let the glue sit for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Do not let it dry all the way, and then very carefully apply a coat of white chalk paint. So for this, I started in the center where there was no glue, which was easiest, and then I used very gentle light brush strokes going from the center to the edge of the scrap wood piece, doing my very best to not disturb the Elmer's glue underneath. You don't want it to get all mixed up with the chalk paint, so very light, gentle strokes. In one direction I find is easiest instead of back and forth. And then just to speed up the drying process, I used a heat gun. But as that chalk paint dries, if you've done everything correctly, the chalk paint will crackle and it will allow the black and taupe paint finish underneath to kind of poke through. So that's why it's nice to use a contrasting color as your base coat, so it really shows up as the Crackle finish emerges. And then make sure you let that white paint completely dry before moving on to the next step, which is Mod Podge. And so I just applied a little bit of Mod Podge to the center of my scrapwood piece here, just enough to apply my tissue paper image. And for this, I just kind of started in the middle and smoothed outwards. I find it best not to use like a side-to-side motion or a smoothing tool because you will for sure rip this tissue paper. I'm more so kind of tapped and blotted to get all the air bubbles out. If you start in the middle and work your way out to the edges as you tap, you'll have pretty good results. Also, this isn't a huge piece of tissue paper, so it's a lot easier to manage and work with. And then I let that base coat of Mod Podge dry just a little bit before then sealing my whole project with a solid coat of Mod Podge over the entire surface. This way you just have a nice even sheen and finish. This is matte Mod Podge, which I feel is best for a project like this. I think it would be silly to paint something with matte chalk paint and then seal it with a shiny finish of Mod Podge, so I like matte Mod Podge on these crafts. But that's it. That's my little upcycled piece of scrap wood using a couple of different techniques that I hope you enjoyed watching. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to use this little scrap wood piece of decor for, but I'm sure I will come up with something.